should you raise your hand. I also wanted to say that we have some BSL interpreters, Gabby and Omateo, who will be signing throughout the event. They'll take regular breaks and do about 20 minutes each, but the whole event should be covered should you need that. I also wanted to remind you that this is a hybrid event, so we have other residents who will be joining us online and who may be asking questions from there, so we may come to their questions from time to time. I would request that if you are joining us online, that you would please keep your questions and ask them so that they match the theme that's being discussed. If you have a general question, we'll come to those at the end. It's also worth noting that as well as being hybrid, we will be recording the event. The recording will be available and notes will be available for you on the council website to view afterwards. But it is worth bearing in mind when you raise matters to try and not share anything of a personal nature from that perspective. This event is about, we want to really engage and talk about the topics, but it's not about things that are hyper local and might be particularly sensitive to you. If there is something of that nature, I would suggest that you pick that up with one of the local councillors after the event. And if that is the case, please don't go home without making sure that the relevant councillor has your contact, or officer has your contact information, so we can follow up with you on that. I'm just going to check my notes for a minute now, just to make sure that I have gone through everything, and that was good because there's a couple of pieces of housekeeping I haven't picked up on. We're not expecting the fire alarm to sound tonight. So if the fire alarm does sound, it would be an evacuation. Hopefully that won't happen, but we would ask you to just calmly and safely leave the building using one of the 3 fire exits, which are this door over here and the 2 doors which are at the back of the room. And if anyone does need the loos at any point during the evening, again they're through that door which is on my right at the back of the hall. And I think it is time now for me to hand over to our local councillors who are going to introduce themselves. So if I can start on this side.
Hi, I'm Councillor Stephen O'Shea. I'm one of the councillors for Twickenham Riverside Board. I'm Councillor James Chard, and today I'm playing the role of the roads between 2 forms. And I'm also one of the councillors for Twickenham Riverside Board. I'm also Vice Chair of the Transport and Air Quality Group. Councillor Raymond, who is struggling to get over here from East London, who should be here soon, is one of the Margarets councillors, and he's chair.
My name is Julia Needham-Watts, and I am the 3rd Ward Councillor for Twickenham Riverside. My portfolio of responsibilities is that I'm the chair of the Environment, Sustainability, Culture and Sports Committee. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Katie Mansfield. I'm St Margaret's and North Twickenham Ward. I'm White Ribbon Champion, fighting against violence against women and girls, and I'm working on Richmond Town Centre. Councillor Koza sends his apologies. He wasn't able to make this evening, and I think Councillor Chard has already spoken that Councillor Raymond's expected later.
Brilliant, thank you. So we're going to look at the first one of our key themes now. So I'm going to hand over to Councillor Chard, who's going to talk about town centre vitality. So you've got your 2 minutes now, please, Councillor Chard.
Thank you, Chair. So we chose this issue because our wards, Twickenham Riverside and St Margaret's, have several important town centres, as you all know, not just for us here in this room, but also for more residential areas further out. In particular, we have Twickenham Town Centre right here. We've got St Margaret's Town Centre, East Twickenham, and also Richmond, which is just over the bridge, of course, from our wards. It's a really important centre for many people here, and particularly towards the east of Twickenham and St Margaret's. You'll all know that town centres have faced a number of challenges in recent years, most notably from online retail, but also from other things like national insurance and business rate increases. Incidentally, to correct a common misconception, business rates aren't set here at local level. It's a nationally applied formula that applies to those business rates, and they can be quite high in this area. It's not all doom and gloom for our town centres though. Whilst there's been some return to pre-pandemic patterns of working, working from home is still up overall, and overall that's an opportunity for town centres like ours, because there's more people at home more of the time. There's also an attraction for businesses to move offices here. It's more popular nowadays to work closer to home. We've also seen some really effective special events in our town centres, like the High Tide Festival and the 1960s celebration here in Twickenham recently. And of course we've got the Centre Stage Festival coming up in Richmond this Saturday, including some Mercury Prize winning musicians and all sorts of exciting things. Councillor Mansfield's been heavily involved in that, no doubt she can say some more about it. We've also sought to make improvements in the public realm, for pedestrians in particular. There was Church Street pedestrianisation some years ago, improvements in East Twickenham, and there are also opportunities for further improvements in that area with the upcoming Riverside development and the work led by Councillor Mansfield in reimagining Richmond Town Centre. Now, not everything in this area is within the Council's direct control, of course. I've mentioned business rates, but there are also things like we don't have a right of refusal over individual businesses moving to the area, so I know there's often concerns over a large chain or yet another coffee shop moving to the area. We don't have a right to veto over those things. If someone gets private premises, they're allowed to run a retail premises there. However, leaving aside that there are some things the council can do and some things that are outside our control, we would be really interested to get your views on what would attract you and people you know to use our major town centres more often for your shopping needs and for leisure.
So if we could open that up now to questions or thoughts or comments that anyone has from the chair from the floor on that topic.
Hello, my name's Ella. I run a local group for mums. I recently started it in January. The reason I'm here tonight is basically for this reason I'm about to say, is that we feel like there's not really enough for mums, especially those mums on maternity leave. In the town centre, obviously we've got cheek chops, but they're trying to get somebody to take over the business. I'm not quite sure at the stage they're at with that. And then a lot of the general consensus is that most of the places in Twickenham aren't particularly child friendly. I know that the George pub is under refurbishment, so I've reached out to them and hopefully there might be some sort of family friendly element there. But you know, on a personal note, I'm planning hopefully, once I've got funding approved, to open my own shop in Twickenham to help with that. I want to open something for like baby, because her baby has gone as well, so really there's nothing to support baby anything. So yeah, I just from a family friendly element, I guess that's what I wanted to raise.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really important question to raise, and it would be interesting to get your views further on some of those sorts of businesses and sorts of activities that you'd like to see. As I say, we don't as a council have a right to veto shops coming in, but we do have an economic development role, and we are looking to sort of attract new businesses in. I'm pleased to see that there's the School of Rock, which obviously is for slightly older children, for learning music locally on what used to be the Barclays site. But it would be really interesting to hear more about what would make things more accessible. And I'm mindful in that in particular that we have a number of primary schools locally as well, and there are need for activities after that, and also we've got quite a number of nurseries in the area. So I'm interested to hear your or anyone else's ideas on what sort of thing that would entail, so that we as officers can focus on the right things.
Can I just supplement that to a certain extent, because it's one of the things that we do hear quite a lot, not just the age of mothers with babies, children's activities with families going out, where activities for young people beyond the playground, which is great when it's there, but on a day like today, it's not always where you want to go. But also teenagers and young people in our borough who need things. There's a couple of different strategies that the council's been working on. One's been the leisure strategy in terms of the sports access for young people. But the other thing is that we are working, and some of the stuff we've been doing on Richmond Town Centre has included how can we make it a nicer place for families, young people. High Street only succeeds if it's for everyone, and it's where the community can come together. That's what it's always been historically. So it's for older people, it's for young people, families, dogs, whatever it is. We have to have space for all of them. So it is some of the things that we are looking through that lens when we are looking at these spaces.
Paul, by the way, Bridge Road, St Margaret's. Much has been impressed by the works done over the last year in East Twickenham to enhance the public realm. And I hope that has been reflected in terms of increased usage and trading for the retailers. What is lacking, sadly, is a similar approach to St Margaret's Town Centre. It's a different sort of geography, different sort of spaces. But it has been looking very shabby in recent times. I see there's some repaving just starting. There's been no public consultation about that whatsoever. The litter bins are overflowing each morning, and above all, in terms of the highways issue, there is this conflict between the junction with Crown Road and St Margaret's Road, which divides call it the retail heart of St Margaret's into two distinctive parts, which is very, very difficult to cross, very dangerous to cross. Can one hope that, given the investment that's been made in East Twickenham, which seems to be a great benefit, we could expect the same thing emerging for St Margaret's, and some communication from the council about what on earth is happening and why the refuse is overflowing from the bins, and why no action about safety at the junction of St Margaret's Road and Crown Road.
Do you want me to take that as the
Well,
answer for the area, or do you
I
want
just thought since it's the bins, I'm sorry to hear that, and I think that's a question I need to take back to our waste officers. Do we need to retime the collections or make sure they're done more frequently, or the positioning of the bins or the size of the bins? But thank you for flagging it, and I'll note it down.
And on the bins, I think specifically, the biggest issues I hear reported to me are after the rugby days, and I have been reporting it back to the RFU. We're trying to get the RFU to extend the cleaning as far as St Margaret's Village, because that's somewhere that isn't included in their regular clean-up, and that is something we're pushing for as part of the conversations with the RFU. With regard to the paving, we've actually, Councillor Raymond's just arrived, but that is something that we've invested more in this year. It was identified as an area of opportunity, and it's needed work doing on it. We've had it. We do the analysis of it, and that's a time at which we make the decision to do the paving in that area. But that is something that we think will bring great benefit to the St Margaret's Village type area. With regard to the junction, I probably should give him a couple of minutes to catch his breath before he's coming. The junction on Crown Road and how it splits St Margaret's retail up. Unless Councillor Chard wants to do it in the meantime.
You can begin, Councillor Chard, and I'll listen.
Thank you very much. It is your ward. I mean, I think it would be interesting to hear from you about how you would envisage Crown Road working in future. I mean, it's a road that it is just between our two wards, in fact.
Yes.
And just in St Margaret's ward. But it's certainly a narrow road. It's one where people have suggested that if not pedestrianised, it could be used for pedestrian access more often, because that narrowness of the pavement doesn't necessarily make it a good environment for, certainly for pushchairs and things like that, but also just generally for shopping, for enjoying some of those places without so much space. But I wonder if you've got any thoughts specifically on the junction.
Well, my colleagues obviously adequately covered it in my absence, and apologies for being late. I've just travelled from East London, and there's a tube strike, so that's proved a little more technically difficult than it would otherwise have been. But I am here. So on Crown Road, I think, look, it's a personal view that, and frankly not one that I hide, that I actually think Crown Road would potentially benefit from full pedestrianisation. And it's a view that, having discussed with traders over the many years I've been a councillor, some traders, let's say of the past, who are no longer there, were really set against I think there's more openness to that now, and whether it's full pedestrianisation or some form of greater pedestrian amenity on Crown Road, I think is essential to making it a vibrant place. Church Street is a different road, of course, with different conditions, but I think it demonstrates very adequately how much of a difference you can make to people's ability to want to linger, to participate, the types of businesses that come in. And at the moment, that street is dominated by car movements. Not particularly fast ones most of the time, although there are fast ones. The mouth of that particular junction off of the St Margaret's Road is also quite poorly designed and what I would describe as flabby. It's sort of open, quite difficult for pedestrians to cross, and motorists sort of swing into it at fairly unusual angles. But I think it all has to be part of a conversation, and I'm interested in views as much as anything else, because as a councillor, none of us sort of opine from up high and say this is how it must be. Happens that my view is there would be quite a great deal of benefit from skewing it to a street that was much more in favour of pedestrian amenity, but I'd want to hear other views from residents, and if that's something that we want to progress, then it certainly can. It can't, I just would add, it can't be dealt with in isolation, because of course the next parallel road, which is indeed in Twickenham Riverside, is Sandycombe, and if we didn't have some interventions there, that would become by definition the default route between St Margaret's Road and Richmond Road, which we would also have to deal with in order to make that happen.
I think we've got a contribution just...
Sorry, no, it's not about this.
Oh, okay.
Is that for you on?
Steve Lloyd, most of you know me. If that part of Crown Road was pedestrianised, you would be isolating Bridle Lane and all the businesses that are down there, most of which are car-based. So to block off the whole row of car-based businesses would sort of drive facilities out of the area rather than bring them in.
I'll just respond to that briefly. It definitely need careful consideration of the access arrangements to some of the roads around it, and I'm not saying that that's simple. What I would observe, though, is that those businesses and residences on Bridle Lane and the surrounding sort of internal network are served from an entrance also, though, from Amin Park Road. So that could be part of the solution.
That's not an entrance. It's a back
It is used.
What about the gentleman who asked the question? Did you have any specific ideas that you'd like to see in St Margaret's?
I think the public realm is so important. The public realm is important, whatever the town centre, but St Margaret's is working on the success of East Twickenham. And the critical bit is that connection, that junction, which needs the first priority treatment. Pedestrianisation, heart and whole, well, that maybe is quite a long way down the line with all the implications of that. But the real issue is that junction, making it safe and producing a continuity of retail activity, linking that which is within St Margaret's Road with that in Crown Road. That critical connection. And just to focus on that and maybe keep in the distance half pedestrianisation. But I think that's going to be very, very difficult, as in most other areas of
Just a quick point on the bins point, because I know you noted it down. I've noticed it's not just after the rugby days, it's more when it's lovely weather. All the bins are overflowing in the parks, etc. then, and a lot of it's coffee cups. I don't know if there's something we could do to encourage the local coffee shops to not give out so many disposable cups, whether it's a discount on bringing your own or something. I don't know exactly what.
Before Julia, or Councillor Needham-Watts is probably going to want to respond on that specifically, I just wanted to understand when you're talking about the good weather bins overflowing, you meaning on Moormead Park, or are you meaning that's on the High Street as well?
It's all everywhere.
Everywhere,
Yes,
okay.
Yeah. No, I'd agree with that. That's something I've observed. Absolutely, I would encourage local businesses to consider, if they don't already, a nice little reduction on the price of an Americano. I think some of them do. I'm not going to name specific names, but some of those cafes that we have do. And they serve lovely coffee. We all have our favourites, and it's really nice to feel you're getting a 50p reduction because you've taken in your reusable bamboo cup or whatever your preferred material is for your reusable cup. So yes, I think that's something that we would encourage. The council has an initiative working with businesses to accredit them with recognising their green credentials, and I think that's absolutely one. So I couldn't agree more really. And the thing about the lovely weather and the bins overflowing, it's a sign that people do want to come to our area because it's it's enjoyable to be in, and they can get a nice coffee and sit in the park, or wander on the streets. And that goes hand in hand with encouraging responsible behaviour, as well as keeping an eye on the collections and making sure we get out early enough before animals get to the bins and so on.
Oh, mine was just a question to verify where it was, yeah.
Philip Jeffrey, Richmond Bridge and Twickenham Park residents. I don't think we should ignore central Richmond in this conversation, because obviously it's the biggest of the high streets. Katie, can you just tell us all a little bit about the work you're doing, please?
Yeah, if that's okay in this community conversation. It's I've been doing a piece of work on Richmond Town Centre, which we know is historically a great town centre. It's a beautiful town centre and a fantastic campus. But like all high streets around the country, it's had its challenges in recent years in terms of the retail offering and the footfall and the spend, in particular post-COVID. And we all know that that is in part because of online retail and out-of-town shopping centres and things like that that have put pressure on retail. But there's also a different expectation of the high street from people and what you want to do on the high street, what we want to do on the high street. So we've been trying to think about that, and what we've really looked at is what is it that people want from Richmond and what's its differentiator and what are we proud of. And so people really want us to have a lot of green and blue space. We're really, really proud of that. But we also want to make sure we look into London and look at the diversity of London that we're proud of, and out to Surrey, which is where we've got beautiful landscapes. So we want to make sure that Richmond takes on board all of that. We're also very, very proud of the environment and the sustainability elements, and we want to push that as much as possible. So we've used that to try and create a programme, and we're at the start of that journey because we've been listening to what people want. And I think the lady who was talking about the mothers not having facilities to go out and spend time, or the children, we've had a lot of feedback that young people don't have enough facilities. So what we've been doing is we've been working on what we can do in the short term and what we can do in the longer term. And the short term, the first thing, Councillor Chard made reference to it, I'm very excited with Centre Stage Richmond on Saturday. We're closing George Street for the first time, well, not for the first time, it's been shut for the light switch on and things like that, but for the day. And we're going to have a whole series of events as to how you could imagine what a high street could be like. And we're going to have activities for mums, activities for kids, skating on the high street for teenagers, and an interactive installation. And Petersham Nurseries, the Orange Tree, they're all going to come out and they're going to spend some time on the high street entertaining us, creating a great festival atmosphere subject to the weather. But we'll also have some bands playing on Whitaker Square, which is also being pedestrianised. So this is an opportunity to see what we could have in Richmond Town Centre, to see the sorts of things that people want. In parallel, we are doing a few short-term projects, and we're doing some activation on the Riverside to see what it is and where people want to go and what people are using their short-term initiatives. And we're coming up with a long-term deliverable plan for the next 10 to 15 years for Richmond, because we need to adapt to what people want now. We need to adapt to what society is now and provide the facilities and services that people want. And that's the work that we're trying to get through at the moment.
Thank you.
Just an additional point from me. I think it's worth reinforcing that everything that we're doing for Richmond Town Centre has such a big impact, especially on East Twickenham, but on Twickenham as a whole, because it's just as much the heart of our two wards as the other town centres are. And so all of the benefits that we're seeing and that we're hoping to see from Richmond Town Centre will be coming up to those of us that live a 2-minute walk over the bridge from it, and also some of the issues that potentially we have, parking congestion on shopping days and things like that. They're not just restricted to that side of the bridge, but also affect us on the other side.
And we'll be taking the learnings as well in terms of how we can work with high streets across the borough. It's the first of them.
I'm conscious of time now, so thank you very much for those questions and contributions on that topic, but I'd like to stop that conversation now and move on to our next theme. So I'm handing over to Councillor Needham-Watts, who's going to talk to us about care for the environment.
Thank you very much. And the reason that we sort of collectively came up with this as a theme is because we receive emails and we hear from you on the doorsteps about how much people in our area care about the appearance and the quality of the local environment. But it does mean different things to different people. It's a huge topic, so I'm just going to pick a couple of strands to highlight areas of work, and obviously then we'll have a discussion. I think one of the key things, and we've already touched on it, that council needs to do in the environment is to keep the parks and the streets clean. And we've been doing a lot of work recently in that. Clearly there's a little bit more to do in some places. I think in particular our waste collection contract with Serco, it's generally working fairly well because we put a lot of effort into partnership with the contractor, ironing out the wrinkles that we had when it first began, lots of missed collections and so on. And it's on a much more stable place. It's generally thought to be performing pretty well. But we know that there are still issues, for example, with waste that gets blown around or spilled and not collected, for various reasons. I don't want to go into it in too much technical detail, but basically we've been discussing with the contractor how we improve this. And we've now got an additional team of waste monitoring officers who are each dedicated to a specific area of the borough to increase their familiarity with how the collections work and where the streets are that suffer from sort of messiness. And they'll be engaging with the contractor who have provided spillage crews to ensure that, you know, when there's a spillage or some messiness, that it isn't sort of passed from pillar to post between the council and the contractor and back and forth. It's just sort of acknowledged and it's tidied up, and I think that's what everyone wants to see. We're also doing more on enforcement against fly tipping and poor waste management. We've had several cameras installed at key locations that have been prone to fly tipping. We had one at Holly Road car park, for example, because we had a period of sort of intense fly tipping at the recycling site there. That improved to an extent. We move the cameras around where they're most needed, so when issues recur, we can move them back again, and that helps us to, well, it's a deterrent. If people know there's a camera there, they're less likely to cause trouble with fly tipping, but it also means that if they turn up in a vehicle and do some fly tipping, that we've got a chance of tracing them and issuing enforcement, which we have been doing as a council, whether through enforcement notices or in some cases prosecution. So that's a little bit about environmental care of our streets. Another angle to take could be in terms of care of our natural environment. We know that's really important to residents as well. We recently adopted our new climate and nature strategy for the next 5-year period up to 2030, and that has a very keen focus on nature and how we work with nature to adapt to climate change and to become more resilient and to make sure we're protecting our environments. Just one thing that it's important to people, it's a big visual representation of our action on climate change, and that's tree planting. And this year has been particularly difficult for our younger trees, which have suffered in long periods without water, but also in the long periods of heat. We generally do have a good success rate in this borough because we've got an aftercare programme for trees, which involves not only planting them well, but watering afterwards. And a commitment to replace if they fail in the first couple of years. But this year has been very difficult, and I think that we need to do more, both now and in the long term, to ensure that we've got that wonderful tree canopy that we're seeking. So, you know, as a council, we're engaging with researchers, including at Kew Gardens, for example, on identifying what species are going to be really resilient and thrive in the climate of the future. An example of what we're doing already is we're no longer planting horse chestnuts, which are very susceptible in drought conditions. We're planting Indian horse chestnuts instead, which seem more resilient, but which have similarly beautiful flowers and fine structure in our street scenes. There may be other swaps of species that we currently plant that we won't be able to plant because they won't be able to cope with changing weather conditions. But it's fascinating, but also slightly frightening. I think Kew Gardens have said that almost 50% of their plants are susceptible to fail in the next few decades because the environmental conditions here are no longer conducive to those species thriving. So we need to work on it and quickly, because we also need to ensure that the people who supply us with trees for our streets and parks have the right kind of stock available for us. So there's a lot of work going on in that sphere. More practically, and perhaps of more immediate interest to you as residents, is that we also now have a Friends of Street Trees initiative running in the borough. And if anyone's interested in this, then make sure you leave your contact details so that you can sign up and get involved. This is about sort of recognising the value of trees in our street scene, identifying perhaps a tree or two near to where we live that we can be particularly invested in. For example, I have a young rowan tree just outside my house, and I've been putting water from our water butt onto that on a regular basis through the summer, and I like to think that I've helped in a little way to make sure that it's still there 2 years later. And we, if we have a street tree nearby, this is something we can all do. It could be you're washing up water, as long as it's not got bleach in. You can use that, it doesn't have to be out the tap. And you can share that with your neighbours. Maybe on Tuesdays you put a watering can on the tree, maybe on Fridays your neighbour can do it. And it's a really nice social thing to do to benefit neighbourliness, but also to benefit the trees. So if you want to be a recognised tree waterer or even a street tree champion and advocate for trees in our streets, then we really want to hear from you. 2 minutes, I'm sure that's slightly more, it passes very quickly. So yeah, there's so much more in the environment to talk about, but let's hear it from you. Thank you.
So if I could just hand over then, if anyone has any comments, thoughts or questions in connection to the theme of care for the environment.
Very quickly, it was a very good meeting a few weeks ago. I attended in Kew, led by the new group, the Friends of Trees, and commendably taking forward very positive action. A number of points were raised by local residents there, and certain I would raise it as well. The lack of effective communication with the Trees Department and the interface with highways. I've been struggling to get some responses from Diffit Jones, I think he is, within the organisation since April on issues I raised in January and again in early August, and just doesn't respond. That's not to say that there's very good service provided by Mr. Vadik, who's the head, and others, but it is a desperately, maybe resource related, to get more effective communication. If you send an email, then one expects to get a decent email response, some meaningful response to the issues raised. It is disappointing that one is not getting that. That was a common issue raised at Kew with local residents as well.
Absolutely, and I took that on board, and as I explained then, we are investing in the tree team a little bit more to get more agility of response, so that if one officer, for example, is bogged down in advising on planning applications, the emails that are coming into the team are still getting a response. And I raised that with Craig Roddick, who you've mentioned, and he's noted that, and work is underway to make sure there's a more timely response and it's done in a professional manner. I did take some notes from that meeting, which I've passed on to the tree team, and hopefully you will be getting a response.
Thanks so much. But related to that, there is the much bigger issue, which I think is a borough-wide one, of phased replacement, because so many of the trees planted 40, 50, 60 years ago are getting oversized, creating root problems in the footways, etc. And I think there's a desperate need in parts of the borough for quite a rigorous exercise in looking for phased replacement in order to deal with this problem of disturbance to the footways.
Sorry, could you please speak into the microphone?
Yes, sorry. I have two environmental issues here, very different ones. I live I'm thinking of the section of St Margaret's Road I live on. The pavements are in a disgusting condition. There's heaps of decaying debris. The curbs and the gutters are full of debris. In fact, weeds are just growing over it now. And that debris is full of leaves that are never collected. It's plastic bottles and junk which is just trodden in. I've heard about the coffee cups and the overflowing bins, but of course you see these plastic bottles, you see the dog poo bags, and it just encourages people to dump more. The condition of the pavements is just awful, and the curbs, the pavements don't seem to be swept at all. And okay, it can be said, on that side there is car parking, but in between the cars there's heaps of debris which surely can be collected or something done about it. The other issue I have, when we've just talked about trees and the green environment. I'm sorry if I might sound a bit, I'll make myself a bit unpopular here, but I can go down road after road in the borough and every big front garden is concreted in, paved in or concreted in. And there's always, and of course we've had lots of problems with discharge of sewage and dirty water into rivers. Yeah. And there's an absence of soak if we pave over more and more and more. It results to many square miles just of concrete and no soak. And I think it's not just having space to plant your trees, it's having space to soak your water into as well. So there's my two rather different issues maybe.
So are we going to...
Sorry, would
Yeah,
someone like to respond?
I work for the youth work volunteer for the Botanic Gardens Conservation International based in Kew Gardens. And I know some of you, one of you was talking about Indian horse chestnuts. Would that be an invasive species which Kew Gardens is trying to curb? Yes.
Thank you very much for that question. Could we just deal with the lady who spoke prior to you, and if we can get a response to her questions, then we'll come back to you about the Indian horse chestnuts. Thank you.
Okay, so just quickly, thank you for raising the issue of unacceptable state of pavements. I think that's noted and we'll follow up. There's general nods of agreement with you. Your point about concrete in the front gardens, you're absolutely right that if we all pave over our front gardens, then we're going to massively impact the amount of water that flows into the surface water sewers. And you're right that once those are overwhelmed, then we get problems with flooding, and we don't want to be doing that. So there is a question of educating people who have front gardens of the value of them, not just for biodiversity, but to soak up rain where it falls. We've got an unfortunate position of many historic concreted over gardens, which is difficult to tackle. What we've tried to do is to make it more likely that when people do make alterations to their front gardens, that they do so in a way that includes biodiversity and permeable surfacing. And we continue to look at ways to encourage people to do the right thing on their property in as many ways as we can. And obviously your ideas and your support and your thoughts on that are also very welcome. Just on the Kew tree, whilst I've got the mic. So invasive species are a problem. I think of a couple of species. The tree of heaven, for example, which is self-seeding, or actually coming up from suckers along our railway lines, is a real problem. There are the famous ones like Japanese knotweed and so on, and they're really, really problematic. But I think that we're moving away from the reliance on solely native species. If we rely solely on what has been native here, we're going to run into trouble because not all of them will be able to cope with the changing climate. So by carefully selecting species that are believed not to be invasive, then we provide ourselves with a bit of future-proofing of our landscapes. But I'm not an arborist expert in terms of species and how invasive they would be. I'm a sort of reasonably knowledgeable layperson, but so I can't give you absolute guarantees on the non-invasiveness of Indian horse chestnut, but it's an interesting point, and we should bear in mind, when we're selecting species.
Can I just ask the lady who asked the question, sorry, where on St Margaret's Road are you? Because we're quite interested in understanding the specifics and just following up on that.
I'm between, there's Northcote Road. I go along. I go to Heron Road to Talbot. Right. That section. But it's very bad. Is it from Northcote?
Okay, thank you for letting us know. We'll follow up and have a look at
The
that.
curbs and the actual drains are blocked. It's just weeds growing out of all the debris that's mounted and decayed. It looks, and it's broken windows. Of course, it encourages other people to dump the plastic bottles, this sort of thing going on. Yeah.
And just to
I'd quite like to come in at that point because I've raised those very same issues in the last 2
phoned up on many, many occasions. I've received emails. Your matter will be dealt with within 5 days, within 10 days. Nothing has happened. I've talked about the dustbin men leaving garbage up and down the street. I've talked about fly tipping. I've talked about the weeds that are growing in the curbs and over the pavements and the cracked pavements. I've talked about the poor response when I've called up because my green bin has not been emptied, the only one in the street, left out at the appropriate point, but just left full to capacity, and it got emptied only when the cycle returned 2 weeks later. It was completely ignored. Today, I went home to find that the cardboard boxes that I'd neatly folded were left behind. Today, I phoned up the council. Thus far, no action has been taken to satisfy me, and all the points that I'm hearing from various people about the whole area, the whole borough, but particularly in St Margaret's, it is absolutely a disgrace. And top of my list of complaints is the fact that I'm appalled at the lack of response from Richmond Council. They palm you off with a text message, an email, 5 days, 10 days. Nothing has been done. And that is why I am here this evening.
Okay, so as one of the ward councillors, that I'm sorry if you're not getting responses. If you let me know or CC me or Councillor Raymond or Councillor Koza on some of the correspondence you've had, we'll follow up on that because you should be getting responses. No matter what you're raising, there should be a response rate. So we can follow up on that for you. The specifics, is it the same area? Is it the same area of St Margaret's Road?
Well, no, it's not. It's Aylesbury.
Okay, so I think that it sounds as if Councillor Raymond and myself and Councillor Koza need to get some of the details of some of this and follow up specifically. We can't resolve those particular areas in a meeting, but we're quite happy to take on and reflect and talk to officers and see what the issue is around there and what we can do about it.
Yeah. There are huge inconsistencies because you might find across the road looks perfectly nice, but where I am, and Councillor Ehrman knows because he came and had a look 2 weeks ago, it's still the same. It's all weedy, growing up all over the place. I won't keep going on, but I would like to speak to you afterwards.
Yeah,
I find it very frustrating. The whole point of having these meetings and these opportunities to share is to put something, an action plan, do something about it. I feel as if I'm hitting my head against a brick wall.
Well, you shouldn't be feeling like you're hitting your head against a brick wall. We absolutely, I don't know the details of what you've been talking about, and the other lady who raised it previously as well. If we can get that information, we can follow up on your behalf and take it forward.
Yes, thank you very much for that contribution and question. I think we need to move on now because time is against us and we need to move on to our next theme, which is Councillor Mansfield talking to us about community safety.
Great, thank you. So I wanted to talk a little bit about community safety, partly because it comes up on the doorstep quite a lot when we go out to talk to people, and we spend time with the police liaison groups and things like that. So we did want to make sure we had this opportunity to talk to you about some of the stuff that we're doing, some of the stuff we're doing with the police, and what we should do. I do want to put it into some perspective. There is a fear of crime, and there is crime in the borough. But in comparison to most parts of London, we are a safe borough and we are safe wards in terms of the reflection on that. We do have specific types of crime that we are seeing reported, and that comes to just over 500 crimes in a year for St Margaret's, North Twickenham area, and just under 1,000 for the Riverside area, in part because the areas that Riverside includes, which includes the town centre. But there's a theme coming through in what we're experiencing, and that reflects what we're hearing on the doorstep, which is about theft It's about violence against a person, it's about vehicles, and it's about burglary. Generally speaking, those are the crimes that are most reported around here. And what can we do about that? I mean, there is a strain on the resource of the police force. I don't think anyone can pretend there isn't. You can read it in the newspapers. And there is also the issue we have of, because we are a relatively safe area, our police force, our community police force, can be abstracted, which is when something happens in central London, they get moved along to other areas. And those are both local issues that we have. Another issue that we have locally is that the announcement of the Twickenham police station not being open for us to be able to go in and make go in and actually talk to police officers in person, which is a frustration, and we are campaigning against that, because that means there's no police stations left open in the borough for people to go in and report. That's wrong, and as the London Assembly member Gareth Roberts is taking on that cause. But there are some things that we can do despite all of that. So first of all, we get together with the local community police at the police liaison groups on a regular basis, and I see the chair of St Margaret's and North Twickenham's police liaison group, Maria Margiotta, here. And the next St Margaret's one is on the 8th of October, and the next Riverside one is on the 20th. And do come along to those, because those are great opportunities to look at what's happening and to discuss and find what is possible with the local police community force. The second thing is certainly when it's regard the things like theft and burglary, there's Met Engage, and I'd encourage everybody to sign up to Met Engage, because it gives you the information and the data that's there and the trends that are there. And when we have the police liaison groups, we also identify issues, and sometimes the police will come round and talk to a local community about the issues on their road. They're quite happy to do that, because if there's a trend on a road of a particular type of crime, we can look at how we can protect the community. Well, the police can protect the community, the councillors can't do much in those instances. But there are some things that the council are working quite closely with the police on, and that's some of the other issues, the antisocial behaviour issues, which is prevalent in the area. So some of the stuff we've been working with the police, we've been talking to them, and they've been doing extra patrols in places like the Craneford, Richmond upon Thames School, Plainfield, sorry, and Aragon Road car park, those sorts of areas of hotspots. We'll work with the police. Previously, last year, there was an issue in Moormead Park. We worked with the police, we got CCTV in there as a temporary thing. It's a roving thing from around the borough. We got it in temporarily to deal with the issue, and we did manage to reduce the crime in that area in terms of antisocial behaviour. And the other thing that we work quite closely with the police on is on some of the violence against women and girls activities. Very, very important in our area. May not be the most reported crime because quite often it happens behind closed doors, but we're working on, obviously we have the statutory requirements as a council to help anybody who is a victim of violence against women and girls, but we also work very closely with officers and with some of our local partners to drive awareness of the issue, because it's quite often hidden behind closed doors. So we're working to try and drive awareness, get it more reported, and also to try and change behaviours by working with some of the partner organisations, and things like bystander training that the council will run to try and prevent the issue, so people know what they can do when they see it. We'll work with we've got programmes together for that to try and reduce that type of crime. That's the overview. Was that 1 or 2 minutes as well?
I think it was.
So we're not very good at that, but yeah, that's the overview of the community safety thing, if people have questions.
Hi, Katie.
Share your questions from the floor.
I appreciate what you say about it being a safe borough, but that doesn't mean it's safe for individuals. And I'm afraid your figures are slightly wrong as well. You quoted 500 crimes.
543 for St Margaret's and North Twickenham, I think.
I think I've got the data-rich figures today, and rolling for the year it's 726. I'm not going to argue with you. That's fine.
It's the data I have in front of me, but yeah.
That's okay. I think you know what my bugbear is, and it's about VOG, obviously. Burglary is not an issue. It really isn't an issue when you look at the overall figures. Violence and sexual offences is one of the categories that the crimes get broken down by. And this is broken down by the Met Police themselves, and so these are the figures that are reported to them. That is 50% more than the next most serious crime in terms of numbers, which is vehicle crime. So there were 181 instances of that violence and sexual offences reported in the rolling year to June. That's 15 every month and nearly 4 a week. So the next number of vehicle crime, it's still significant, but it's 50% less than the figures we're talking about for VOG. The VOG strategy, you know, we think it's great. White ribbon activities are fantastic. I don't think the police are doing enough. The council tell me that they're doing everything they can, but these figures, these are reported ones. You said yourself, so much of it gets unreported. You know, we used to call it domestic violence. It used to happen behind closed doors. These are the ones that weren't just behind closed doors. Burglary, there were 42 instances of burglary reported, as opposed to 181. So I'm going to argue with you and say that burglary isn't the big issue. Criminal damage and arson actually comes in third with 98.
Yeah, criminal damage and arson, I think, was bigger in Riverside than in St Margaret's, I do think. I mean, the data I have is slightly different from yours. It's probably taken from a different period of time. It's what I have in front of me, and it is the top 4. But I certainly 100% agree with you on the VOG element. And it doesn't mean, while I say we are a safer borough, we are in comparison. That doesn't mean I'm diminishing the impact of violence against women and girls at all. I know it is a really, really serious issue, and we will continue to do what we can to make a difference. It's a community issue though as well, and it's about the community coming together to make a change here. Because I think, as you were saying, it happens behind closed doors in so many instances. And it doesn't happen with some big burly man beating up a woman and coming out in all bruises. I mean, this is a very, very different sort of experience that people are having, particularly in our borough. When I speak to the VOG officers of the council, they tell me that one of the differentiators for Richmond is it's much more hidden. It's much more about coercive control. It's pillars of society doing the wrong thing behind closed doors. So we appreciate that that is the issue. The issue of VOG is going up across the country, across the world. And it has risen significantly between 2018 and 2023. And I think we're all grappling to deal with it to a certain extent, because what can you do when these things are happening? You can have programs to support the survivors of violence against women and girls, and we do have those. And you can have issues, or you can have programs where you are addressing the perpetrators as well and arresting them, but you have to get under the skin of the issue. And this comes from Jess Phillips as well. This isn't just us saying it locally. To make a difference, we have to make a difference in the younger people coming through. We need to address the behaviours, and we need to address the attitudes in society that are allowing this to take place. And if we don't change the attitudes, we will not move the dial on VOG. So I think that what we can do locally is work with what we have, and that is working with the partnerships that we're trying to create. We're working with the Rugby Football Union, we are working with the Hampton and Richmond Football Club, we are working with St Mary's University, and some of that is we're looking at what can we do to change the attitudes and behaviours of people towards this, both in terms of the attitudes and behaviours of men who feel that they can get away with doing this sort of stuff, and also the way that the society accepts it that then enables them to get away with it. We cannot do everything as a local council to address this as an issue, but we will work with you, we will work with any organisation that wants to try and help us tackle this. The VOG community is very unified in what we can do against it, and I will work with you and whoever else it is to try and make that difference.
I think it would help across the board. I think it would help across the board, not just this council, not just this ward, if when we were talking about crime stats, we headlined VOG rather than talking about burglary, which might, be more close to other people's hearts, but it is the #1 crime in the ward and in the borough.
Okay. Okay, and maybe we'll speak with the police, and we'll speak with the PLGs and see how we can talk about it more openly, and the PLGs and with the crime stats.
Thank you very much. I've lived in the borough for quite a long time, so as I'm sure others have as well, and they'll remember the Richmond police station is now a pizza palace or pizza. And I wonder, is the councillor concerned that the police are going to do the same thing with the Twickenham police station and turn it into something else?
Well, we're fighting them closing it. We don't want it closed to the public, and we'll do everything we can to fight that closure. We have a petition going, if you want to sign it. We are bringing it through the London Assembly, through Gareth Roberts. But we will do everything we can to not let that happen and represent what people here want. That is not what people want.
Yeah, I think just on Twickenham Police Station specifically, I live right behind Twickenham Police Station as it happens, so I see the police very much. It's still an active centre for the police. It's widely used area, it's a key centre for the area. So the issue that's currently going on is that issue of the closure of the front desk, which is a concern, certainly. But I think, and I hope the police will sort of confirm that it remains an important operational centre for them. And I think we can talk about whether we'd like to see more police operating out of there, particularly for our specific wards. We'd like to see the police more often with those kind of things. But I think that it remains an important operational centre, and I hope that will continue.
Hi, my name's John McLaughlin. I'm one of the community inspectors for Richmond Borough. I can appreciate people's concerns and frustrations within this room, and again, I sort of echo a lot of that, but decisions have been made centrally by a management team. At the moment, the decision has been made that there will be police stations that will be shutting around London. Again, it's not definitive. They've made public what they're proposing, but they're within a consultation period, and as the councillors have said, there will be an opportunity for councillors and members of the public to be part of that consultation. But I cannot stand up here and say that Twickenham Police Station Office will remain open. What I can say is that there are no plans to shut the Twickenham Police Station. That is where we have our response team that serves both Richmond and Kingston, so we have to have that capability to service the community. And at the moment, they look at it as tough choices, but arguably, I started in '98 in the service, and we had 4 police stations that had front counters on this borough. We're now down to 1. I walked out of Richmond Police Station on its last day before it turned into a pizza place. So again, although I don't live on this borough, I've worked on it since '98, so I feel that passion that you have about our capability, our facilities, and that's why I'm a community police officer. Yes, there's certain decisions that I can't influence, but what I can say as a community inspector is that irrespective of what happens or what decisions are made this year, we will still be your community team, you will still have your ward officers, and as the councillor said, we have this new social media or I think it's called MetEngage, or it is called MetEngage. That is the system that you can contact us on, and I would absolutely encourage everyone to do that. I have some details here if you want to see me after. Unfortunately, the conversation around the station office will continue, and I know the opinions of the leader of the council and the opinions of the MPs. I can't give you my personal opinion, but again, they are fighting for this, and like I say, it's not a definitive yet. We will find out, but there will be police officers stationed at Twickenham, irrespective of that decision.
Thank you very much. I think we need to move on now to our final topic, which is Councillor Amon, who's going to talk to us about pedestrians and cycling.
So this is not just one subject, it's 2 very big subjects, and therefore I am going to try and do 2 minutes, but I don't know how well I'll do. So I'm going to limit myself by just sort of rattling off some of the work that the council's doing, but ultimately turning this over to more questions because they're so broad. I mean, I think the first thing to highlight, as already been said, is that we are investing, not just political rhetoric, we're investing record amounts into roads and pavements. We've got £21 million in addition to the previous higher than ever levels of spend that we were putting into roads and pavements going in over the next 3 years. And that is meaning that we are able to resurface and repave many more roads in this borough, in this ward, and many other wards around the borough than was previously possible. London Road and Witten Road are due to get full resurfaces within this financial year. You only have to look at roads like, I think it's Halliburton, which has recently been resurfaced, to see the kind of quality of finish that brings. And you can see live pavement works beginning on a section of St Margaret's Road as we speak. It is going to take us, at that sort of investment level, about a decade to get the road network into an acceptable condition, and that's on specific subset of roads. I won't say any more than say, whatever political queue of council existed before us, they all didn't take the right decisions on the correct investment approach to take. And it's only this council that have begun to actually get a grip of the necessary level of investment that we need. That's a bedrock for all forms of transport, pedestrian, cycling, and of course motor use and public transport. We've got a pedestrian pilot going on, due to have more at the next Transport Committee, explaining how we intend to uplift specific corridors of high pedestrian use to be better for pedestrians. So targeted set of interventions driven at making those spaces better to pass through and to linger in for pedestrians. We recently consulted on a 2040 strategy, which we're now working up off the back of the many hundreds of responses we got from residents about that. And clearly, pedestrian and cycling amenity are going to be big pillars of that, and including smaller levels of infrastructure, maintaining existing infrastructure such as roads, towpaths and so on, but also looking at some of the bigger infrastructure over many years that we could introduce that would be enabling for pedestrian and cycling use. Councillor Child, myself at the very least, I know colleagues probably also agree on this benches as well, a great enthusiast for the idea of another pedestrian cycling crossing over the Thames, for example, between Twickenham and Ham, but funding notwithstanding. I think just to pick a couple of other quick ones, because I know my time's out, we look to try to make frugal, kind of wise decisions over the use of resources, improving cycling amenities on main roads or indeed on back roads where we can. Colpot Road being a case in point of recent infrastructure investment in sinusoidal humps, which are much more smooth for cycling and so on to be able to go over, so that becomes a much more default route with low traffic for cyclists to be able to use. Twickenham Town Centre clearly needs massive amounts of work, has done ever since the day I became a councillor, but in many ways has been bespoke because of course we needed to get over the large hump of Twickenham Riverside redevelopment and understand what we would be doing with that site before we make more systemic changes to Twickenham Town Centre. But I can tell you I'm itching to be getting on with a piece of work there, having cycled and walked there and feeling that the facility of course is far from sufficient. Just one last thing, I guess. I mean, we may want to talk about all sorts of other things, whether they're line bikes or wider sort of respect agenda between different road users. I'll just end on this. I think one of the things I'm conscious of is that I get quite a lot of inbox and PLGs, frankly any PLG that one could go to, you'd hear about the poor behaviours of cyclists, for example, in certain ways, being on pavements, running red lights and so on. I'm not immune to those issues. Of course, some of them are policing issues, to which we might want to turn to our colleagues from the police to talk about. But critically, I think what we have to recognise as residents of this borough and people passing through is whether people are walking, cycling, using public transport or motor modes, we need to have more respect towards other road users, particularly more vulnerable ones within the sort of transport hierarchy. And that's why I'm quite keen to work with officers to see what we can do to communicate better with residents about making them think a little bit more about what they do. Quite clearly there are people out there that won't respond to any of the council's messages around this agenda, but it is one of the things that I would like us to do more on, to try and encourage people in cars to be more respectful to cyclists, in turn cyclists to be more respectful to pedestrians, and so on. But on that, I'll leave it.
Thank you. I can see a question here at the front.
Councillor Owen, thank you. Can you describe the council's attitude to cycles on the pavement?
Well, the council's attitude, first of all, isn't a matter for much commentary, because it's a matter of fact that cycling on the pavement is illegal. And to that extent, I believe in upholding the rule of law, but we are not the agency for upholding the rule of law, and we have no enforcement powers over cycling on pavements. But let me be clear, as the chair of the Transport Committee, I do not support or condone pavement cycling. What I would say, just in parenthesis, is in part, not in whole, that phenomenon is a consequence of hostile road environment, and the council therefore do have a duty, and that's why we have deployed resource in certain places where the money is available and there is public support for delivering transport infrastructure that enables safe cycling on the carriageway, usually in segregated lanes. That obviously has quite a big impact on reducing the amount of pavement cycling that's going on, because people with good sense will prefer to use that.
Yeah, unfortunately, even when there is the dedicated spaces, people sometimes choose to ignore them and cycle on the pavement. I think this is a question of education more than anything else. Too many, it's become completely normalised, let's be honest. Completely normalised. Very, very different from 10 years ago. And pedestrians, particularly elderly ones, are in danger of that. And woe betide to change. But goodness me, I'm sure everybody here has had some experience of that. You just do not put yourself at risk. I'm not exaggerating. I'm absolutely not exaggerating. So surely, I mean, I take your point. You know, I know just as it's speeding on the road, you don't have compliance powers. I understand that. The police are so denuded of people, resource, to be honest, that they don't do much about it either. But can you not, via education, and it's a broad point, I totally understand that, just challenge the idea that it's normal and it's okay?
In short, yes, and that was what I was alluding to with the respect agenda, but I think one of the things we'll have to do is frame that within a wider agenda than just cycling on pavement, because clearly a motorist that exceeds the speed limit is also behaving in a disrespectful and dangerous manner to pedestrians and cyclists. People who close past cyclists are behaving in a disrespectful and dangerous way too. And I think that what we need to try, within our limited resources as a council, recognising the limited reach that we have, is to try and express our clear views about the rights and wrongs around those behaviours as best we can. And I think there's more we can do on that. What I would say is I don't think we're going to have a major impact on behaviour, because as you say, it's been born of many, many years of sort of societal change. And I mean, I say it to people privately, so I might as well say it in the hall. A wazzock is a wazzock, whatever form of transport they're on.
And just to add to that, Philip, if you can let us know if there are any particular flashpoints. So I think sometimes it is like just obvious it's a stretch of road where someone's being a wazzock and no amount of road signage or anything can do anything about that. But there are occasions, for instance, where a shared space stops becoming a shared space and it's not always completely obvious that sometimes a cyclist will go flying straight over it, and that's the cases in which we can potentially take a look at the area and see if there's anything that we're not doing.
I just wanted to pick up on your point about education. We do support programmes that educate young people how to cycle responsibly. There's perhaps more we can lean into on that, about making sure that it's not just whilst they're doing the course with the tutor and the high-vis jackets and all learning the right things, but that you know, they continue to be praised for conducting themselves properly on a bicycle. But I do agree, it's not just cyclists, it's all road users. And today I've had so many close passes. It's, you know, I'm becoming more confident cyclist because I cycle more and more. But it's difficult to encourage friends who don't cycle when they're nervous about things like that. It can be pretty alarming if a large vehicle comes. You know, you're trying to cycle away from the parked cars because you're worried about being dwarfed, and yet then that leaves very little room for vehicles to come past. So we have to work out how to politely share the limited space that's available to.
Yeah, it's important to mention that cycling proficiency point, that we have a very, very good uptake.
I was just going to say,
among young people of those cycling proficiency facilities and courses. And so, I mean, I can see the reasons for negativity as well, but actually there's a lot of young people in this borough who take the issue seriously, take their safety and take others' safety seriously. I recognise the point you made.
No, sure. I think, but what James is alluding to, you don't need to elaborate much more on it, but is that we are building tomorrow's generation of cyclists and road users, And this borough continued investing in cycle training for young people when many, many others didn't. And recently we announced that we have the highest amount of young people receiving that bikeability training of anywhere in London. So I think the future is looking good, albeit I know that today perhaps may not.
Okay, sorry, I hope I'm not going to be a wazzock by asking this question. So I'm going to give you a quick observation first, is that most of the cyclists I see on pavements are actually in the 30s. And I do see the cycle efficiency going on. I think that's great. It's a really great idea. We had it when we were kids, so it's really good to see it now. But my question is actually about the line bikes when they are parked. Who is responsible for them when they are parked? Is it the last person to put it there? Is it the cycle company, or is it the council? For example, should the bike fall over and put a dent in a door and leave a car on with a 300 quid bill? Me? Who pays for them? Or who is responsible for them?
So there are a range of things there. I mean, I think as in relation to damage to property, I would encourage you to get in contact with the provider of the service. And if you need counsel or counsellor support, of course, let us know. I think on the broader point of responsibility, well, it depends whether you mean legal, whether you mean social or financial. I mean, the truth is that the end user is responsible to the provider of the service, parking the bike within the constraints of the rules that govern what is allowed, and they have to photograph it in order for that bike to be released from their rental period, and therefore judged to be in an acceptable position. Now, the only way that one can avoid that is by incurring a fine. And, sorry, one caveat. Of course, with line bikes, there's a particular issue with their back brake being broken, and therefore being ridden without an electric assist. And so there are a number of users of line bikes at the moment who are operating in effect outside that regulated system. But those are the conditions that apply. Now, there's a separate question about whether or not the rules that apply to a provider like Lime or any other about where bikes can be parked need to be changed. But at the moment, the borough does accept a set of acceptable and considerate parking approaches on pavement as well as on carriageway and in bays, and we are building out the network of bays progressively through the administration's term of office. There are some that argue that we should move to a wholesale bay-to-bay model alone, but that is not without its challenges, the risk of sort of jumping on your question, developing a bit, because of course to maintain a network of bays that would provide as much amenity to users as is presently the case with what we call the free flow, the ability to be able to park sort of within reasonableness anywhere, would require us to co-opt quite a lot of public realm, a number of parking spaces around the borough, and in many places that would mean that the parking bays are probably underutilised for cycles, because in places like Hampton or Ham or so on, where the usage might be quite low, you'd have those bays very often largely or wholly unoccupied, which also would excite, I imagine, a lot of resident unhappiness too, in places where parking amenity might be quite stressed. So, like so many things in transport terms, there is no easy answer, but the council are presently looking at our service operation with Lime and with whom we move forward in terms of a new service operating from next year. As part of that, we will be trying to extract further concessions on the way the service operates for a range of reasons, including reducing the amount of obstructive parking that takes place.
Thank you.
Paul, by the way, occasional cyclist with a Chinese-built cheap Brompton. It seems to me that the biggest issue of recent times, the biggest problem, has been the provision of electrically powered bicycles. It's a long way from being the beautiful green agenda of people pedalling around, whether it's on old-fashioned pedal bikes or racing bikes. It is now the problem of electric bikes with a capacity to go at high speeds, some say up to 70, mostly going at about 30. Can I ask whether the leader of the council, Councillor Roberts, in his capacity not only as leader of the council but also as GLA representative for this part of London, and indeed the MPs and indeed with the council, are really raising issues about quite a radical approach, which is to require users of electric bikes to be 1, licensed, 2, regulated, and 3, to be covered by insurance. it's a national issue, but one which is particularly relevant to London. And it does seem that one's not to cure this problem of irresponsibility unless there is that same kind of duty laid on cyclists using powerful electric machines as is laid on ordinary motorists or users of other vehicles.
I'll start, others may have views. I was with you all the way on the problem. I'm not 100% with you on the solution. Because the situation is that what you refer to as e-bikes is covering a multitude of different vehicles. So e-bikes do provide a really important way to get many people who don't cycle otherwise to be able to use cycling as a form of transport. And I commend them. I think they're excellent. They're an excellent development in our transport mix. But when I talk about e-bikes, I'm talking about those that are specifically regulated by rules and conform to those rules as an e-bike, which mean they have a speed limit inbuilt within them, and they have certain safety characteristics associated with them. Those are absolutely fine to function on our roads the same way that bicycles do, off pavement. The problem is there are many, many, many illegal e-bikes, as people term them, on our roads. And as John McLaughlin and I have discussed previously, and we've talked about potential enforcement action around this, indeed there has been some recently, these are not e-bikes. They are in the colloquial sense, they are electrically powered, but they are basically motorbikes. And the failure that has happened, if John will forgive me in saying to some extent, is a failure of enforcement, but actually it most importantly is a failure of legislation and of goods regulation. These vehicles should not be on our roads. They shouldn't, in my view, as at the risk of sounding slightly illiberal on this particular subject, but they shouldn't even be in our country. Frankly, the only reason they're here is because of a loophole which says if you use these e-scooters and e-bikes that are not regulated for public highway, you can use them in private land. Well, I think we should have had a system that required people to demonstrate that they had a purpose for using them on private land, an undertaking or a rationale that explains that, rather than be able to buy them basically like a Wild West and then use them like the Wild West on our road network. So for me, rather than a need to sort of establish a new regulatory and licensing regime for people on e-bikes, the solution actually lies within correct enforcement of the border lines that exist between different class distinctions of vehicles. And the government, frankly, need to get a grip of the agenda. And I have been lobbying at London Council's level. I've spoken with the police extensively, and I know that Councillor Roberts and MPs and so on are also engaged in that debate, because the present government are looking at changing the legislative arrangements around these vehicles as part of their devolution bill. And we wait with anticipation whether, in fact, that will have a proper grip of the technological differences.
Could I just respond by saying that the impact on pedestrians of an electric line bike with its massive weight hitting a pedestrian is significant. And the idea that it's something which is just a stage onward and is as polite as an ordinary pedal bike is something totally different. The sheer weight of the impact of the mass of that bike and the person on it, on the pedestrian, is as serious as a road vehicle, if not more so.
That isn't proven in statistics.
And cars kill pedestrians.
Yes, yeah. I get the point you're making. Look, there's absolutely a point to be made that there is a difference in the weight of the vehicle,
yes,
and the mass does have an effect. So I'm not dismissing that. But these vehicles are speed limited, and many cyclists, without the aid of electric, could indeed go faster. So speed is as important a factor as mass in a collision. And what we found in this borough at the very least is the introduction of these line bikes has not resulted in any commensurate increase in significant terms of those issues.
I'm conscious of time again, and I'm afraid I've allowed this sort of final thing to significantly overrun. Unless there are any questions, I don't know, Melissa, if there's been any questions online, or if any of the councillors have anything else.
Go to this lady over here, she's not spoken yet.
Thank you. Just as a pedestrian using a pram, recently in Twickenham we had the rows of prowlers scaffolding on the pavement. We had the two old banks one School of Rock hoardings and the Riverside hoardings were so close to the street furniture. How can you allow that? Couldn't get round with the pram. There's no crossings to go to an alternate pavement. Why were they able to have all the scaffolding at the same time?
Those are matters outside direct highways control, but it's its own. What did you?
Yeah, no, well, first I'm sorry to hear that that's been challenging for you. I think that's one that we'd need to take away and get officers to look at where the scaffolding's been put up and whether they've implemented the rules correctly. I'm not able to answer that right now, but thank you for raising it, and we'll look at it.
I think the reality is that the scaffolding may have been put up correctly, but you can't reasonably fit a person and a half through underneath it because the pavements are narrow.
I think it's a really important question to raise, and I've noticed similar areas myself that the space has been very constrained. Now, clearly, when people are doing sort of lawful development work, they do need to sort of have some barriers for reasons of safety and things like that. But I think there is an open question as to whether we impose strict enough requirements in some of those very heavy footfall areas where prams are passing, where wheelchairs are passing, and things like that. So we'll take that away, because I do appreciate, particularly in Twickenham Town Centre, it has been very constrained recently due to a number of developments. So thank you for raising that.
Thank you. We're going to move into the open discussion time now. So if anyone has any questions outside of our four themes that they would like to ask, then you are able to please share your thoughts, comments or questions now. Sorry, I can see a hand over there.
I can go. Sorry, I was going to ask. Is this a question? Is this a comment? The question of the police station was brought up. It's very important to me that there is a presence, and a presence seen on the street, that there is surveillance in public places. And the presence of a police station is very important. It shows that the police are there. I can recall a few years back now, whenever there was a strike on, a massive number of people outside Richmond Station, and somebody being very badly beaten up by somebody else who was clearly deranged. Nothing was there, no police to help. I managed somehow to squeeze through the crowd and go home. Last year I was assaulted at Richmond Station, and by a young woman, about 30ish I suppose. She pursued me out of the station and then confined me in the bus stop there, the place there, and she was holding me to the wall and abusing me. I managed to eventually push her away and get on a bus that came along. Now, after that event, I did both put in a recording of the crime to the police. I also put in a complaint, generally, that there was no security, no observation at a mainline station about what goes on. I suffered it, so I saw somebody before, a couple of years before, suffering the same thing. There should be security oversight at the station. No police on patrol, no security from the station itself. I don't know if I had any impact. I have noticed at Richmond Station recently there is an absence of all the beggars that were once there. This young woman who assaulted me was asking me for money. There is an absence of all those beggars. Maybe they've been cleared away. I do not know. The rough sleepers are not there. So maybe, hopefully, something has been done in a public place. But I think there is a general problem of the lack of security, the lack of oversight in public areas.
What do the police say?
Sorry, thank you for sharing that. I don't know whether any of the councillors would like to respond. I'm very sorry that you had that experience.
Yeah, hi again, John McLaughlin. Yeah, well, I'm sorry to hear your story. Obviously, as a local community team, with the resources we have, we try and be as visible as we can. And again, our visibility is dependent on the information that we're receiving to tell us what is happening and where it's happening. Again, if that information comes to us, then we can be in those areas when these things occur. In regards to Richmond train station, I don't really want to go into the politics of who or who shouldn't police it, but British Transport Police and the train service have that responsibility within the station itself. We take responsibility outside of the station, and part of our current policing plan is to have officers visible in and around Richmond town centre on certain days at certain times, and due to that we have seen a decrease in certain crimes. However, I'll obviously recognise I would love to have more officers, love to have more resources, and if we have more police officers on the street, we know that crime will go down. We have to make the best of what we've got, and again, a lot of that comes from the information we receive from yourselves. And that's why we say to people, if you see something happening, whether that be at the end of your street or whether you're out and about, if you can relay that information back to us, and Met Engage again is the best way to do that, or via a police officer if you do see one walking around, and again I appreciate that's quite rare. We will then act on that. My details are on the Metropolitan Police website, my colleague Chris Jackson's on there, all the officers are on there. You can put your ward details in, it will tell you who your ward team are and how to contact them directly. We will be as visible and proactive as we can be, but again, we have to work with you, and we're reliant on you to tell us where it is, what's happening. So again, I say to you, please tell us, hold us accountable, and we will do our best to be as visible as we can.
But you used to have a police station right next door to Richmond Station, but you closed it down.
Yeah, I did personally close it down, but you're right. Yeah, we had two. We had one at the top, and then we had Sovereign Gates, where we had officers based out of the training centre. Yeah, I totally agree. We also had one at Teddington, we had one in Barnes, we had Twickenham, and that's when I first started. And again, due to monetary cuts, we're now down to Twickenham Police Station. I have 3 sub-bases, one in Sheen, one in Barnes, and one in Tangley Park. And arguably, Richmond is our busiest place, and we don't have the visibility of police officers there. That's our challenge. That's what we're trying to get over, and that's why I say to you, if you see things happening at certain times, we can put our officers into those locations. We have response teams that work 24/7. We have specialist officers that come across the borough all the time. Information is key to us. Even a little thing is key to us. So please do let us know what's happening, and please do report the crime.
I fully agree with what the lady was saying about that. I think that sometimes organisations underestimate the importance of just being able to drop in and see someone, whether that's police front desks, and obviously it's not John McLaughlin's decision personally, whether that's police front desks, and also whether it's train station ticket offices. I think that train companies have taken the view that because people can buy tickets electronically, they no longer need to worry about those things. But I had an incident a few years ago at Twickenham Station where a young man was having a mental health crisis on the platform, which is obviously a worry at a train station, and I was able to go to the ticket office and get some support and assistance from the people working there. That kind of thing is really important, to have those people with responsibility who you can speak to personally, whether that's a train station or a police station. And I think sometimes organisations do forget that need for personal contact. So yeah, no, completely understood.
Could I also just very briefly say, I mean, at the risk of sounding slightly more hawkish, can I just say how much I'm grateful, and I hope it comes across that the borough's residents are, to John and to the officers that do serve, because we understand that what you're having to do so is in such incredibly difficult, constrained resource environment, and that it's kind of, I hope it's, I don't expect you to comment on it, I hope it's edifying to hear from residents that what they want is more of you, not less. And that's obviously quite high praise, but it's a shame that the people that really need to listen to it aren't here to hear it, right?
Especially when 1,000 are up in Trafalgar Square on Saturday, they arrested 70-year-olds from protesting in Palestine, which is unbelievable.
but I know that you should be having a resource that put into that.
Good evening, James here, Twickenham Riverside. I'd like to raise a concern about the recent parking changes just down at the Riverside and the reshuffling the spaces. I'm a resident at St George's Place, just behind Church Street. I've been there 2 years. It's a beautiful little part of town, and I'm very happy there. But with the recent changes that Mick Potter, Parking Services Manager, and his team have brought in, I know I recently wrote to you, Mr O'Shea, and the rest of the councillors. There's supposed to be a 6-month trial in the area with a review come December or around Christmas to see if it's affecting residents and such like. The current situation is there's been 5 parking bays put alongside the flat which I own. It's not a rented property, and property around here is quite expensive, and completely blocks out any daylight, particularly when there's high-sided vehicles parking. Almost a metre, maybe less than a metre sometimes if you've got a bit of a tailgate on the vehicles. You can stay there for 24 hours, 48 hours. It's a Zone D area, so it's not like it's pay and display. And with the back and forth since probably the middle of last year now, with Parking Services, speaking to the MP, emails, I'm now at the point where I'm looking to sell because there's no solution. There's been no consultation, there's been no communication with the residents, and my question to you is, were there any steps taken for the consideration of the safety and the welfare of those residents, particularly with reversed vehicles, the exhaust being about a metre away, to the point where we can't even open the window in the house now. I mean, it's a pretty dire situation.
Thank you. So I'll start with this one, and then I'm sure that there'll be other views. So first of all, I've got a huge amount of sympathy for your specific predicament, and I think the videos that you shared showing about basically the exhaust kind of being so close to the open window is particularly important. So as you mentioned, this is ETMO, experimental traffic order, and it's a 6-month period to look at how best to optimise the parking across the zone, because we know that we can't have the parking along the embankment. It's not an appropriate use of that space at the riverside, but at the same time, residents' parking is incredibly important here, and we want to make sure that it's spread throughout the zone as best it can be. So the planning officers did a huge amount of research and to make sure that it can be done in the best way, not plonking it all in one place, but making the best use of the land that it had access to. And so what we're doing as part of this 6 months is really see if there are any elements that aren't appropriate to that. So we've been having kind of back and forth in the background on your particular situation, on a couple of other places in the zone where it may or may not be the best place to do it, or where the harm may overcome the benefit. But I think, as you say, I do have a lot of sympathy there, because whether it's stationary and it's blocking it off, or whether it's coming and going and you've got the associated fumes and noise with it, then I do appreciate the issue there.
Yeah, thanks for the feedback, and it's reassuring to us a 6-month review there. My concern is, as we approach Christmas and the Christmas period and move into the new year, this is now a daily nuisance. Not only a daily nuisance, but it's a massive health impact, to the point where it's claustrophobia, can't open the windows, and I appreciate there's rumblings going on with the council and the conversations, but what is the next step? Could there be a step brought forward for this, because it's actually impacting health and standard of living?
Yeah, that's a really good point, which you had mentioned before. So, so I think, as you say, 6 months it is a period of time. So that is one of the questions that I have been asking, specifically about your one about whether there is a midpoint. And I'll perhaps catch up with you separately after the meeting on that point, if that's all right.
Yeah, I'll do that. Thank you.
Sorry, I can see a number of hands up in the air, but I'm not sure who was first. So.
Yes, on the very topic that James has put forward, I'm also from St George's House, and I did do some research on what they've done with the parking there. And in fact, it is illegal what they've done, because where there's habitable windows, it should be 5 meters away from those windows. And that's exactly what they have not done. And all this business of trial and see how it goes and whatever, it's illegal, and they have simply, literally ignored that fact. I did point it out to someone who was measuring up, and he just said, oh, well, you know, the council has other car parks in similar situation, you know, shrugged his shoulders and walked off.
Okay, well, I mean, certainly, that would not be the appropriate response to a legal versus illegal matter. So I think I've made a note of this. I've met these very experienced planning officers, so I'm sure that they haven't done anything illegal here, but I will specifically check that point as part of the general.
I would just like to say, I think you remember the Grenfell Tower. About 8 years ago, yes.
Sorry, could someone bring this gentleman a microphone?
The mic, remember anything, remember was the Grenfell Tower. And that must be similar things like illegal cladding, yes.
Can I just add one thing? I mean, look, I think the point's been well made, and we'll certainly look at it again. I think the only thing we're saying is, I mean, I'd like to see the information about the 5 metre point, because the vast majority of our residents' houses are far less than 5 metres away from parked vehicles in the public realm. So yeah, but I'm saying you pick a terrace house in many parts of the borough, and it won't be 5 metres away from a habitable window from parked cars. So I'm happy to look at the point. Although my understanding of the site as well is that this is a location where parking previously existed, because I actually, my first job in London was actually working in the building you now inhabit as an office, so I have a bit of familiarity with it. But I will speak with your ward councillor colleagues and see what we can do.
Yeah. I think this lady at the front had a question.
Hi, I'm living very near the rugby ground. I just wonder if you can say anything at the moment about the application for more licences from the rugby ground.
So it's a process. It's a process both in terms of planning and licensing. And I think the consultation closed at the end of July, and people had to feedback by then. Licensing committee will be scheduled, I believe, at the end of September. Is when it's likely to come. And in advance of that, anyone who put in an objection will be invited to come and speak, or objection or support will be invited to come and speak at the licensing committee. So dates are being confirmed, and it's just a process that it goes through. So we can have no influence over the process. The process is a quasi-legal process that the council will go through, but no decision is made until after that committee. Does that answer the question? Is that what you were?
Yes, just if you had any particular information on it at the moment.
So on whether it'll happen or not, or just the process?
Yes, yeah. I knew it was happening, but it just was any particular information.
I believe, and I don't have the dates of the licensing committee, but I believe it's the end of September. Yeah.
30th.
Yeah.
Just to comment more than anything, so to follow up what Bella said earlier, things that we as a family have brought us to the town centre, Twickenham, High Tide, it's been great. Chalk and Church Street was great. 60s Day looked amazing, couldn't make it. We have concerns, I suppose, if there's an increase in the number of event days at the stadium, that those kind of events won't be able to be had, particularly if crowds and spectators are not of the family sort of friendly variety. So I just wanted to put it out there that more of those things definitely would bring us into the town centre more.
I mean, obviously the ward council may have more say, but I think just from the perspective of the proposals from the RFU, I mean, I think probably actually that's one of the least concerns, because I think actually in many ways one could argue that more activity at the stadium will actually contribute to the vibrant nature of that space.
Where you've got road closures and people can't move.
I appreciate that.
People leave with children because you can't get around, the rough is closed, we can't walk there. There's a reality to this.
That's the point I'm going to move on to. Is I think it's less about that type of activity going on. It's about the fact that it probably is primarily for visitors to the borough rather than people who live here. And it has to be said, my personal view, while I understand the RFU's need to try and make more of a commercial success of its asset than it presently does, I think the impacts of the present footprint of activity are so profound on residents that unless they're willing to do something really quite game-changing in the way that either the infrastructure that is needed is invested in to make things work better, or operational changes are so significant, I am personally of the view that the envelope of additional events that they're asking for is not sustainable, and I certainly won't be arguing for it.
So as one of your ward councillors, I think your councillors are very concerned that in seeking to introduce an uplift in the number of events at the stadium, to both understand that the RFU have their own reasons for doing that, and there may be positive things to come out of that as well as negative, but that through not just the licensing process, which will be about the so-called licensing objectives, including public nuisance, protection of children, and things like that, but also through the planning process, which is a separate regulatory process running in parallel, that as the local planning authority, the council will look at those things. It will look at the impacts on the local environment, on the transport network, on the roads, the railway, but also on the things that you've mentioned, is what is the impact on amenity for local residents. And it's a really valuable point that you've raised, because I think that we're advocates for Church Street and how lovely it is to have a whole range of different events, whether it's markets or the chalking event, and getting the vibrancy and the input of all the different businesses there. We don't want to lose that, and we need to make the strong case that Twickenham has all these valuable things. And the rugby stadium, yes, they're a valued partner. My family, we're fans of rugby. It's great just to say, yeah, we're from Twickenham, where the stadium is, and that's a recognised thing. But there's more to Twickenham than Twickenham.
I would like just to sort of emphasise that point. So people talk about all the things that we've been talking about this evening would be turned on their head if you had so many more events in the stadium. Parking, transport, public realm, litter, personal safety, all of those things will be negatively impacted. The people who live here, I live in the centre of Twickenham, and frankly you can't move on rugby days safely around the borough. Somebody I know works as a domiciliary care worker in Twickenham. It is extremely difficult to get to the elderly and the vulnerable. Now, I'd like to see the council engage in a proper consultation exercise from the council, not from the RFU in their biased way, and understand all the different aspects, including those that impact the people who can't speak for themselves, the housebound, the disabled, who rely on others being able to get to them.
Those are very powerful points, well made. To a degree, we're constrained by processes that an organisation has to go through if they want to change how they operate, and one of those is the licensing system and the other one is the planning system, and both of those have consultation elements to them. The planning application hasn't been validated yet because in the view of our planning officers, the RFU haven't submitted enough detail on many of the impacts that we're nervous of. So it's taken very seriously, but when and if that planning application is valid, i.e. they've submitted all the information they need to, then there would be a proper consultation. I take your point about people who perhaps don't have a voice, not everyone can be there and make themselves heard, but but that's one of the things we're passionate about as local councillors, is to advocate for those people so that the decision makers understand all the issues.
I would say though as well, we've also done considerable work in speaking to residents about this, all of us councillors. So I think we have gone out there and spoken to people on the doorstep. I think we've got a good picture of what the range of views are. My view again though, just as well as the doubt, is that you've got a 20th century institution in the form of Twickenham Rugby Stadium wanting to move into the 21st century. We all understand that. The problem is the infrastructure that supports it isn't 21st century. It already creaks at the seams doing what they do, and with no significant investment in that infrastructure, I really don't think they can expect to be able to do the amount of work that they want to be able to do there.
On the subject of giving a voice to the vulnerable, the housebound, to parents with prams and pushchairs and wheelchair users, I would like to raise the issue of the blue badge parking and the absence of it throughout the borough. I've mentioned it to another councillor. I think it's deplorable that we only have one blue badge parking bay in the whole of George Street. And people might say, well, the blue badge person, or I drive somebody around who's severely disabled and is also 92. If ever we want to go, or he wants to go to a bank, or if he might want to go to a shop or have a coffee out and just mingle with the rest of the world, it's a very difficult task, particularly in Richmond George Street, because you've got taxi ranks everywhere, you've got taxi parking outside Tesco's, you have one single blue badge parking bay. And there are scores of people like myself who go round and round in circles. You cannot go to a car park and expect somebody who's disabled to walk to the high street. You have to provide blue badge parking where there's accessible routes to get these people, my friend included, and other disabled people that I know, into places. So when you're doing the scheme and thinking about developing places within the new scheme that you've got for Richmond, for George Street, could I put in a plea that we think about disabled people? Because if you're going to make it pedestrianised and you're going to eliminate the one parking bay, my plea is create more designated parking for people who are disabled and are dependent on people like myself to drive them in so that they've got access to society, because a lot of people who are housebound and are vulnerable, we need to get them into situations, particularly where there are young children. We've all seen that wonderful series of programs where children have been taken into care homes, and how elderly people, people with dementia, are suddenly reinvigorated and come back to life. Now, I know a lot of people who can't get out and about, and even the person that I'm trying to get out and about, I, as an able-bodied car driver, know my way around the borough. It is near impossible. I cannot get this person to a bank. He wants to go into the bank, but he cannot park because of the one blue badge parking space. So if we could put it on the agenda, and really, along with parents and children and all the other categories we've discussed, not forget the vulnerable, dementia sufferers, the disabled, and all the people who need to be a focus of attention.
Thank you. And are you talking specifically about Richmond Town Centre or?
The whole borough. Because
Okay.
I go out and about around the borough. I'm always in Twickenham, I'm always in Ham and roundabout, and particularly Richmond. But it's all very well saying, well, you can park in a parking bay. You can't get in the parking bays. I had a nasty episode around Richmond Green. I took somebody, this disabled person, to Richmond Theatre. there are parking bays, but if you've got an event on Richmond Green at the same time, as happened to me this particular weekend, there was an Indian dance festival, the place was heaving, all the car parking bays were taken up. Okay, you can park on a double yellow line. You've only got 3 hours. If you have a mishap with a handicapped person and you're delayed or there's some scenario that you have to prioritise as a duty of care the needs of the disabled person, I got a parking ticket in Richmond and I was absolutely appalled that when I put in my mitigating circumstances, they were thrown out and I had to pay the parking fine. When I had a 92-year-old who's got dementia, physically disabled, and also has a multitude of health issues. And it makes me feel, what kind of a borough is it that won't give somebody the benefit over 11 minutes going over the 3 hours because the person's had an incident?
And on that, I raised the matter with the officers and I've sent you a response.
Oh, thank you.
As of today.
Thank you. But you can see it's important to me because I know lots of people who are in that circumstance and they do need a voice, and I'm glad you're a voice, and that's why I came tonight as a voice for the disabled.
Well, thank you. So just specifically on Richmond Town Centre, when you were talking about that, there is a filter that is put through, everything is being put through, which is disability access. It's not just about parking, it's also about how the space can be used by people who are less able. So it's to do with seating, it's to do with space usage. So there is an element being looked at with regard to that.
So that's moving forward.
We
haven't got anything at the moment, we've got no seating. I mean, if you have somebody like I do, you know, you're walking from the car to get into the bank. If he needs to sit down, you've got no seating at all.
Very,
Seating is
very important, the seating, like Richmond, very near Richmond Park. Quite a few, not much seating space left, yes.
Yes, so seating, yeah, I hear you, and I agree with you, and it's one of the things that we need to look at.
It's also to say it's one of the things that we're doing as part of what I briefly mentioned in my attempt to be only 2 minutes at the beginning of the previous piece, the pedestrian pilot. So what we're looking to do is construct a set of interventions, including seating, shade, improved pavement facilities and so on these very important corridors. So there also will be improvements that emerge from that.
I think the secret is to look at it through the eyes of a disabled person, because we make all sorts of decisions and judgments about what suits them, but you've really got to empathise and put yourself in a position, because it's opened my eyes being, around somebody disabled.
Thank you for that really helpful reminder. I'm very conscious of time because time is against us, and I've slightly overrun in terms of managing this open discussion session. I think we really need to leave it there. So I wanted to thank everyone for coming. Thank you for all of your comments and questions. I also wanted to thank the councillors and the officers who've been involved in organising this event. The councillors will be here for a little bit of time afterwards if you need to share contact information or follow up on something that's been raised. And yes, thank you. The meeting is now closed. Thank you, Julie.